Okay, yay.
Mickey, thank you for such a kind and generous
You
introduction.
are
That
so
was really
welcome.
lovely.
Welcome back.
Yeah.
You were here. Welcome back. I say welcome back because you were here recently interviewing Lisa Geneva.
Right.
And you're back in Connecticut. You used to live in Connecticut.
Yes, and
now,
actually further away. Now I live in Katona, much closer.
Yeah, that's really nice.
And I love this library very much.
Thank
so
you.
I'm happy to be back.
Thank you. Well, we're happy to
And
have
thank
you
you all
here.
for coming. And thank you, Eve from Elm Street Books, one of my favorite bookstores.
Yes.
I love to always thank the bookseller. It's very hard, as you know, for small businesses these days. And bookstores are the best of the small businesses, in my personal opinion.
And Eve is the best. Thank
Yeah.
you, Eve. So I want to jump right in. I think, yay, Eve, Elm Street. I want to jump right in and say that I think I speak for everyone in the room when I say you had us at the title.
Right.
I don't think that there is anyone in the world, certainly not a woman, but anyone for whom the words, "I've tried being nice," doesn't resonate, right? And I thought about it because there's a lot of different ways you can say it, but it also made me think about, like, you know, when you travel and foreigners say, well, what's with Americans that you guys like smile all the time? You try to act so nice, like act like like we're fake, you know, like being nice is a fake thing, or we shouldn't try to. What is it about being nice? Like,
well, a few things. Yeah, I actually, I do write in the title chapter is the first chapter in the book, and it's about when I finally hit my bottom with being a people pleaser to a certain extent. But, and I actually was so angry at somebody that instead of saying, oh my gosh, you know, it would be so nice if you wouldn't do this thing, I finally said, look, I've tried being nice. And I didn't plan it. I've never said those words, but it turns out it's very effective. I recommended it. It's, I don't know if any of you have kids, but my kids used to do this thing where they'd say, no offense, but, and you'd be like reeling, like, okay. Yes. But anyway, so yeah, that, when I said it and the woman had the reaction, I thought that was funny, but I also thought, oh, that's a really good title for this essay collection that I had been working on. And so that is how that came about. But as far as what was the thing about being nice, I think that it's interesting. I do think that we Americans have the reputation, and I actually do kind of write about that in another chapter of the book, of being, you know, maybe too affable, and where certain cultures are more serious. But also, often those are actually the funniest people. They're just a little drier. We're not.
Yeah, and you do write later that there was this one like tennis partner you had who was just really straightforward, and it was actually like a relief because you know it was just like she was just giving it to you straight, and it wasn't this exhausting like.
Right. Yeah. So I took up tennis late in life, and I write a bit about tennis in this book. And you know, I do think that you can learn anything you want to know about another person on the tennis court. You know, if they're some people are generous, some people are cheating, you know, some people are mean, and other blamers. Like, you can learn everything about them. So yeah, I did like to write that, but yeah, I think that is something. I also didn't grow up playing tennis, so it's a thing that I came to in my 40s and kind of fell in love with. And I play all the time. I'm the worst tennis player. I play all the time, and people who have never seen me play tennis imagine that I'm good at it, and I'm not.
I know, I thought you were good at it, and you keep telling me. All right, so I want to go back to, it's actually, rather than have you explain why this moment in time was the right moment for this book, because you've written, you know, novels that were all different from each other. You have a memoir. So I was thinking, well, why these essays right now? But if you don't mind, will you read an excerpt that sort of speaks to that? Okay. This is such a treat. I love hearing authors read their own work. It's so nice.
I usually, when I write, I actually prefer writing fiction, although I did enjoy writing these essays. And some of them had been previously published, and most of them are original, but I did enjoy writing these. But anyway, okay, so so this is the chapter about the conflict I had with my neighbor. And, but actually this is setting it up, explaining what a people pleaser I am. And so I'm explaining that when I met my husband, who's actually here in the room tonight. We were in college, and he wasn't famous in the least bit, but he was like an open mic comedy guy. And then we were together for years, and then we had a couple kids, and we were, kind of broke, and he became famous, but I didn't notice because I had little kids, and he was doing all this work. He had this hit one-man show off Broadway, and I was at like Mommy and Me classes, and then one day a few things happened. Like we'd be walking down the street and people would yell, "Dennis Leary!" And I'd think it was friends of ours. And then another time we were walking into like a movie premiere or something, and people were yelling, "Dennis Leary!" And I thought he had like committed a crime or something. So and he had to keep saying, "I told you can I swear here? I told you I'm fucking famous." He got so mad. I'm famous. I was like, "Oh, I forgot. Okay." So anyway, so I kind of explained in this chapter how when we're now, I still do it if we're walking down the street in the city, people will say, "Dennis," and I'm so, because it was hard we had hard times, and now it's so nice that people know who he is. They're like, "Dennis Leary," and Dennis is like, "Hi," and I'm like, I do too much, like, "Hi," and then I say, "Dennis, the people," anyway. So here I go. I could offer many examples of the confusion and sometimes even injuries that resulted from my attempts to be the nicest person everybody ever met, but here's just one. We were at the US Open women's tennis finals years ago. Somebody invited us to sit up in their very fancy corporate box and watch the match, and we brought our teenage kids and had a great time. You take an elevator down from the boxes, and when the match is over, everybody crowds around these elevators and shoves their way in. We were riding down, packed in like sardines. Dennis was staring up at the floor numbers that were ticking away, and I was staring into the face of a woman whose toes were touching mine. She was with a guy who was grinning shyly at Dennis. The woman smiled and said, "We're big fans." And I did the whole, babe, these people, they're big fans of yours thing. Then the woman said, "You guys must have people saying stuff like this to you all the time." And I smiled and said, "Yes, we do." Then the woman said, yeah. And for some reason, both the woman and her boyfriend suddenly frowned and looked away. This caused me to mentally rewind and replay her words, and I realized that she had said, "You guys must hate people saying stuff like this to you all the time." And I had smiled and said, "Yes, we do." The elevator doors open. Where was I supposed to stop?
Keep going.
Okay, the elevator doors open, and the people started to stomp off into the crowded pavilion, but I chased them through the crowd, saying, No, wait, excuse me, I thought you said, but they were not interested in anything I had to say at that point. When I returned to my family, the kids were dying of embarrassment. Jack kept saying, "Why were you so mean to those people?" I didn't understand them. I was just trying to be nice, I said. Dennis grumbled, "Listen, I've said it again and again, leave the people alone." Is that where I was supposed to stop?
Keep going.
Oh, okay. You hear the term people pleaser in 12-step recovery rooms a lot. Being a people pleaser in the recovery or any therapeutic world isn't a compliment, it's a character defect. I've dabbled in recovery and therapy for most of my adult life, yet I've spent too much of that time trying to make everybody love me. But then I turned 50, and then I turned 51. And not long after that, I stopped ovulating. Ovulating? If you're a man, don't be embarrassed. This is important for you to know. Ovaries rule women's minds, bodies, and souls, but mostly our minds. I first heard about this ovary-brain connection while touring Vassar College with our daughter Devon during her senior year of high school. As we wandered through one of the old dormitories, our guide explained why the hallways were so wide. A theory in the 19th century, when the building was constructed, was that educating women could make them sterile. Sitting and studying would somehow force too much blood to rush from their ovaries to their formerly barren little brains to help them to try to process information. Extra wide hallways were constructed so that the hoop-skirted women could exercise by walking and running past each other up and down the corridors. It all had to do with forcing the blood back down to the ovaries where it belongs. One group of prospective students and parents were amused by this story. "That's so funny," I laughed. And then my laughing sort of petered out because I realized that the original Vassar designers were onto something. I'd had one ovary removed during a surgery several years prior to visiting Vassar, and since then, I had been unable to A, remember to buy paper towels, B, watch videos of flash mobs in malls without crying, and C, understand what was really at stake in Iran. When I had both ovaries, you should have seen me. I was smart. Though I wasn't technically a genius, I could hold my own in a conversation that had to do with topics other than dogs or sex. Now that was all I really knew anything about. It was obvious that ever since I'd lost one of my 2 ovaries, I was working with half a brain. I visited the Vassar website when we arrived home because I wanted to find out more about this ovary brain theory. I thought I could work it into the plot of a novel I was writing. Maybe my character would be half lobotomized like me after she lost an ovary. I didn't find anything about it on the college website, but I did come across a list of some very famous visitors to Vassar. One of these was the writer-philosopher William James, who, in 1896, gave the young women a lecture on psychology and relaxation. He scolded the Vassar girls for trying to wear a bright and interested expression all the time instead of the stolid expression and cold-fish eye of their European sisters. Ah, yes, the cold-fish eye, I knew it well. I encountered it every time I stepped off an airplane onto foreign soil with my dopey, old, bright, and interested expression. I worked half-heartedly on trying to be more stolid and reserved, but a couple of years later, my remaining ovary decided to call it quits, and it became effortless. That's when I learned why people call menopause the change. I'd read and heard that when women go through this change, one of the positive effects is that they stop working so hard at being nice to everyone. But I had thought it would come on gradually. I didn't know that one day I'd be simpering an apology to a stranger who'd spilled their coffee on me, and the next day I'd march out of my house, cast a cold-fish eye upon all creation, and think, fuck off. I've never read that aloud before.
You are hilarious. You're just hilarious. Everybody knows you're hilarious.
I actually thank you. When you referred to me as a humorist, that I've never been called that before, but I've often thought I'd like to be called that.
Oh my gosh.
So thank you very much.
Well, and
check that off the bucket
list. And it's
list.
so funny because it's true.
Oh,
I mean, that's the thing, is like,
you.
you're funny, everyone knows you're hilarious, but another thing that you get called a lot is brave.
Right.
I hear that a lot with people.
This
because you're so honest,
well,
you know?
the thing is that it might seem brave that I talk about my ovaries and my alcoholism and my sex life, but actually, there's stuff that I don't, that's nothing. There's stuff I don't put in.
So that wasn't hard? Like I was going to say.
This is like the acceptable stuff.
This
yeah,
is
I mean, I think
acceptable.
it seems brave because, to be on, to kind of talk about your private life. But of course, yeah, it's not as brave as one might think if you knew some of the
If I knew
stuff.
all the
But,
the
the
little
other
secrets.
thing is, for me, writing personal essays is to take into consideration my family members. And I actually really love memoirs and, personal essays. But sometimes when people are too harsh about their parents, especially their mothers, which my mother thought I was very harsh, which arguably I was. But anyway, but sometimes I'm uncomfortable even as a reader, feeling like, oh, I hope she's not still alive. But especially with my children too, it turns out kids don't really like you to write about them. And now that, when I think about it, I'm sure everyone can relate. When I was a kid, if I heard my mom on the phone saying, oh, Ann did the funniest thing, I would die, right? So imagine if your parent wrote about you. So I usually do, if I write about them at all, I have to run it by them first. I wrote an essay that was a modern love essay about my marriage, and I had to run that by them because we've been married for a long time. We've been together for a very long time, but we had a rough patch. And the modern love piece was about a time when our marriage was kind of floundering, and when the marriage was floundering, we were really worried about the kids because we tried to not have them aware of what was going on, but kids know everything, I thought. Turns out, so I wrote this essay years after we had gotten through the rough patch, and now we're happily married again. I sent it to my kids, and they both were shocked and said, "What?" So anyway, it turned out it's often the things as a writer, when I write personal stuff, the things I worry about, no one cares about, and then the things that people are really horrified by, I didn't know I shouldn't have written somehow. But I'll tell you what, that's why I prefer writing fiction. I think you can be more honest. Writing fiction, I can write a character, I can create the characters that I fully understand, and they might be very much informed by people in my life, but the person isn't often going to recognize that the person is them.
Yeah,
So-
I feel like I love your characters in fiction, but I love you as a character in this book of essays, and there's a lot of crossover. And I think one of the things that's great is that you describe, various degrees of imperfection, but we root for you and we root for them because there's this authenticity to them.
That's so nice.
They're not phony.
Right. Well, I have to say, so I did study writing in college. I always, wanted to be a writer, and I've always been a writer, trying to be a writer before I was published. But I know it was advice I was given, but it's advice I give all the time. It's something I learned. My first book was a memoir, again, about my son. My son was born premature in London. We went there for a weekend. I went into labor and we stayed for 6 months. It's called An Innocent Abroad, and it was my first book. But what happened was I didn't write that book until years after the crisis was behind us, because when I went through it, it was very traumatic. But then, it's like the old adage, tragedy plus time equals comedy. And I could remember funny stuff. But most importantly, my dear friend, my best friend at the time, I was writing to her throughout this, because this was like 1990. We didn't have cell phones, and there were no phones. You couldn't afford to call a person overseas. So I wrote these letters, and because my friend is very funny, even though I was in this crisis, there were funny things happening around me that I was writing about. And then when I told her I was trying to write this book, she sent me all the letters. And then I thank God she kept them, because I forgot about these things. And I realized I wanted my book to have that first book to have that tone of writing to a good friend who gets you. And so that's what I was starting to say. I do give this advice, when people are trying to write, especially, fiction or even memoir, it's often there's an attempt to sound very writerly, and you want people to understand how smart you are. And I think instead, that book taught me, trust your reader, trust that your reader is like your sister or your brother or your close friends, and give them the credit for being smart and knowing what you mean, right? And I think my favorite authors do write that way. I would say one who writes that way all the time, I mean, he's no longer alive, but John Cheever's stories, to me, I have some of them I could recite from. They're like my comfort. They're like my thing.
Wow.
But anyway, some of my favorite stories of his is he just takes the reader under his wing. Like he just kind of and he often, even if it's not in the first person, he'll kind of do an aside to the reader. Like you know what I'm talking about. You get in that waspy kind of John Cheever voice. You know the type I'm talking about. He'll say to the reader.
But you do that too.
Well,
you
I
do
copy
that in these essays. You do that too in these essays. It's very intimate, especially when you talk about your recovery. I found like that was really like you are talking to a close friend. It was so interesting. You used this phrase when you were talking about it, about how when you were drinking, your drinking fueled your self-love. And then at the same time you said, but then all these horrible things that I did while I was drinking that I didn't remember, that I felt horrible about, I never would have done had it not been for the drinking.
Right.
And I thought well, now that you've confronted, and are confronting your alcoholism, does that free you to love yourself in other ways? Because you don't write, I mean, your humor is self-deprecating.
Right.
You know, which seems to me that people who are that way have to be kind of confident. I don't know. And you always say you're insecure.
No, I think I'm more.
like,
I think with age, one becomes more confident usually, or not. Again, not caring as much. But yeah, there's an essay in here called. I think it's called 3 Drinks Short.
yeah, it's 3.
Yeah.
That's in 3 Drinks Short.
Yeah.
That you talk about
because I wrote in the book, The Good House, which was told from the point of view of an alcoholic who's in denial. And that actually was I really enjoyed writing that character, probably the most of any character I've written, because I decided I really wanted to write I love an unreliable narrator, and I also really know a lot about denial. I come from generations of alcoholics. I've really been around it a lot, and I'm fascinated by it. So I wanted the character to tell the reader how annoying it was that her daughters thought she had this drinking problem, and then explain that she wasn't an alcoholic, and then slowly have the reader learn, that she's maybe not telling the truth to the reader. So that was just like a fun thing to explore as a writer writing fiction. And in this, the 3 drinks. So I think I had Hildy say she was born 3 drinks short of comfortable, which is how I feel I was born. And I think that's what I was explaining in this thing. So once I had my first time I drank, it's like, oh, now I know. After that 3rd drink, I was suddenly the smartest, the funny, the best person ever. And then cut to 3 o'clock in the morning, and I realize I hate myself the next day. No
one's talking
I have
to
no
you.
friends anymore.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that is bad.
Yeah.
But it's funny. I'm not telling it. But
It's
funny when I write about it.
I want to go
funny
back.
now.
I want to go back in time a little bit about to your formation as a writer and a humorist. Before we jump into that, would you read a really short one?
Okay.
Because I think it's a really good segue into what made you are today.
Okay, so this is the chapter about, it's called The Red Carpet Diaries, I think. So this is about how my husband and I showed up in Hollywood, in Los Angeles, as absolute rubes. And I'm just going to tell a little, this isn't in the part I'm reading, but just to give an example, he was making a movie. It was like his 2nd movie. And we were living in a very small apartment in New York still at the time. But they rent, in those days, the studios would rent you a big house. And they asked us if they were going to rent us a car. And Dennis said, we need one with that can hold 2 car seats because we got 2 kids. So we get there, and they had rented us a black Lincoln Town Car, and we didn't know that was like a limousine. Like, we just thought it was the most fabulous thing we'd ever seen. We couldn't believe how luxurious it was. Like, oh, if only my parents could see us now. And then we found out when people laughed, when we got to to the valets, they were like, oh, that's hilarious, Dennis, you're a comic. And we had to pretend it was like we were trying to be ironic with it. And so anyway, and then what happened with that was we were pulling up to a movie premiere there, and there were all these black limousines and town cars. But even then, we didn't quite get it. We got in line behind them. And then as we got closer, I was like touching up my lipstick, and I said, they must have a lot of valets to park all these cars. And then we pull up to the red carpet, and a man jumps out and opens the back door of the back seat, and there he found diapers and Cheerios and 2 car seats. And then he said, wait, is that Dennis Leary in the front? Anyway. So I'm just trying to say we weren't the most sophisticated, but this is about when we kind of knew the ropes. And we used to go on, One year, I was standing with reporters in the press line at a pre-Emmy party. Oh, also, I often am with the reporters in the press line. It's the best place to be because Dennis is actually an actor, so he gets asked questions, but I get to be with the reporters who give me all the gossip about people coming along who just got out of rehab, and I love it. So one year, I was standing with the reporters in the press line at a pre-Emmy party. Dennis was making his way down the line of photographers toward us when a young TV interviewer told me she thought it would be fun if I interviewed Dennis instead of her. If I interviewed Dennis instead of her. That did sound like fun. I took the microphone, and just then, Cloris Leachman was about to walk past. I had never met Cloris Leachman, but she was on a very short list of people I'd love to meet before I die, or they died. I called out, Ms. Leachman.
The TV interviewer was young. She had no idea who Cloris Leachman was. Cloris had no idea that I didn't work for the entertainment network whose logo was on my microphone. And I ended up interviewing her instead of Dennis because I get to talk to Dennis all the time. And I had a million questions for Cloris. I started by asking her about how she got started acting, then her parts on the stage, the Last Picture Show, Mary Tyler Moore, and I had just begun a probing question about Young Frankenstein when the real TV interviewer snatched her mic back and angrily waved Cloris away. "This isn't the fucking actor's studio," she snapped at me. No one cares about Betty White's life story. Jesus.
Okay, so
And by the way, she was stunning, and so I loved meeting. I loved interviewing her.
Cloris Leachman.
Yeah.
She is a comedic genius. I totally get it. And if you know who Cloris Leachman
Everybody
is,
does, right?
then you know who Irma Bombeck is. You write a lot about your mom, and in an interview that you gave, it's not in this book, but I watched an interview that you gave where you said that your mom used to read Irma Bombeck out loud to you.
Yes.
When you were a kid, and I wonder, how much of your formation as a writer and as a humorist is down to like these incredibly funny women, and even your mom, who sounds funny.
Yeah, so that's funny. So, yeah, I mean, didn't everyone's mother read Irma Bombeck? I mean,
yeah.
If you're a certain age, you know. But my mother my mom is still very funny. It's funny, it seems to have this cycle where like every few years there's somebody declares, why can't women be funny? And remember Christopher Hitchens did a thing, women aren't funny. And every time that comes up, it seems so odd to me because I grew up, I didn't know men were even supposed to be funny. I only knew women were funny because my mom was funny, my dad not as much. But also in those days, the lineup, I always babysat on weekends. And on Saturday night, it was Mary Tyler Moore show. Then it was the Bob Newhart show, but Bob was the straight guy. It was Carol the receptionist and his wife that were so funny. Then, of course, Carol Burnett. And then Saturday Night Live, of course, Gilda. I didn't know. It always seemed so strange to me. I didn't even know men were allowed to be funny until I met them. But I also find that there are so many funny female authors that have influenced me. I think and not so much Irma Bombeck, but I think people don't know. Shirley Jackson, most people know from The Lottery and darker kind of fiction. She wrote a few hilarious kind of memoirs. They were they were memoirs. One was called Life Among the Savages. And I went to Bennington College, and actually The Lottery was supposed to be set in North Bennington, but she was raising kids up there, and it's hilarious. And I actually knew one of her sons, and it was just funny. In those days, by the way, you could make fun of your children, and they didn't want to sue you. Those were the days. But anyway, but even going back further, Dorothy Parker. I feel like there's so many really funny female humorists. I don't know. Has anyone ever heard of Jilly Cooper, the British? But like the sexy books, right? Okay, so Jilly Cooper wrote for the London Times, was a journalist, but this one memoir called The Common Years, and then she's written a few others that are not like full of sex. They're hilarious though. I recommend that. I have to say, this is a library thing. I have found the best just in libraries discovered. That's why I think Amazon has taken something away from society, somehow, because it's only in a bookstore, but especially a library. I would never have known about Jilly Cooper, but I was in a library in London, like just getting out of the rain, and I found this book and just sat there and read it. So I think that's why these libraries are so important. They always have, even if they're completely renovated like this, you'll find some old great books that people have.
Yeah, definitely. I wonder if I'm seeing this scene with Cloris Leachman. I'm sorry, I just can't. I can't. It's so funny. It's like physical just even the words Cloris Leachman in the same sentence with you, and I'm seeing it like it's a film. I feel like you're writing.
Oh, that's so nice.
Both your fiction and your nonfiction have this like cinematic quality for me, and I know that it was in 2021 that The Good House was made into a film.
Right.
But I feel like a lot of your stuff could be made
nice.
into, have you ever been asked to work on the screenplay of your work? Or?
No, not really. I mean, actually, I was very involved. I did actually do a little bit of, uncredited touching up of stuff in between drafts. That went through many different drafts and various screenwriters. It took a long time. It takes a long time often for a book to become a film. I'm friends with Meg Wolitzer, and I'm sure many of you have read The Wife, and that was one of my favorite books when it came out. But that was in the 1990s, and then so it takes a while. And also, many books are optioned, and they don't become films. But that one did finally become a film, which was very satisfying.
And your agent, what did your agent, you said something
Oh yeah,
to me
no,
about
that
how
in
your
those
agent-
days, so now I think it's changed, but in those days, my agent said, it was very exciting. So when it was first, the book, I think it was right before it came out, somebody optioned the book, and they immediately attached Meryl Streep as the female lead, Hildy, the character, the alcoholic in denial, and Robert De Niro as her. Actually, she said to me, can we do this? I only want to do this if Meryl will play Hildy. Can I just option it with that, and then if she won't do it, then you can move on? And I said, let me think about that. Yes, that you can do. And then she did. But then drafts came and went, and her schedule got sacked. And then we ended up with the fabulous Sigourney Weaver, who really nailed it. So it all was good. Question? Sorry, I think I got off on a tangent.
Have you ever acted?
No,
Are you
in
an
fact,
actress?
that's why when I write fiction, a lot of my novels, they have a lot of dialogue, and I just refuse to read them because I'm not an actress, and I feel when I try to read dialogue, even a dialogue that I've written, it's awful. But no, I've not. But I acted like a television interviewer once when I interviewed Cloris Leachman.
What was the thing, you were telling me the other day about something that you had to do. Was it for the Amazon thing? Was it for Modern Love?
Oh no!
Where you had...
When they made the movie The Good House, it's set in New England, but they shot it in Nova Scotia for New England. It looked just like it. And they said, "Would you come up? And we want to do some stuff some publicity stuff." And they said, "We always like it if the author of the book does a cameo." And I said, "Okay." So it was the middle of the night. It was a scene in a bar. My husband's an actor. I've been on sets many times. I kind of know the rules, which the main rule is never look in the camera. So they said it multiple times. Just walk by Sigourney. Just don't look in the camera. And I said, okay. And then here's the camera. I walk in and I go like, and then they were like, it's a wrap. And it's in the movie still. I don't know. So yes, I will not be acting. That was my acting time. I'm not doing it again.
Oh my goodness. Oh my good. All right. So how much of you makes it into your characters? There's this funny, you talk about this, like, how in The Good House, there's all this nude swimming, and there's nude swimming in some of your other books. And then I'm reading in the essays, how you're like, one hair above an exhibitionist or something, how when your kids left, home, you just walk around totally in the buff, like all the time. And I thought, oh my God, that's her, and that's why she's putting all the nude swimming.
I'm naked all the time.
You're naked
except
all
when
the
I'm here.
time.
No, I'm not.
You're
but I
skinny
did write
dipping in all the books.
But it was liberating. I did write an empty nest essay because I was dreading it. It was really sad that we were, building up to it. And then we have a son and a daughter. When we dropped our daughter off, I was sobbing, and then Dennis was driving, and then he kind of pulled over, and I was like, I'm fine, and I hear this choking, like, and I look over, and he's got his head in his hands. He's like bawling because we'd left our precious daughter at this school. We go home. I'm like cooking the dinner. I've got like Seinfeld on the TV in the kitchen. Dennis comes down and automatically turns it off because when the kids were growing up, you don't watch TV while you eat. It's family dinner, and you don't watch them on school night. He went to turn the TV off, and I said the words he'd been waiting 20 years for me to say, which was, "Let's watch TV while we eat." That's how we've had dinner ever since. And that was the beginning of becoming the people we really are. And that particular essay is about how, some people are just naturally, altruistic and considerate and care, and careful about things they say. We're not really like that, but we had to be once we had children, because we knew as soon as we met them in the delivery room, like, they deserve better than this. We had to up our game, and so we really did try. If I was gossiping, if I was gossiping with my sister, I'd like stop if my daughter came in, because it's not nice to gossip, So the point of the thing was, I realized, like, being parents actually, among many other wonderful things, it made us become better people, but we didn't know how hard it was until we didn't have to be like that anymore. And so we were just like, we started like, instead of, saying, would you please pass the salt? We just like lunge across the table. And we would just, eating with the TV on, chewing with our mouths full. And then one day I think I had like just my underwear on. And is it time?
No, it's not. It's not.
But anyway, I was gonna do this like embarrassed dash to the washing machine to get my laundry. And then I realized that the people that like freak out if they see their mother in their underwear weren't there. And the one person in this world who likes to see me in my underwear was coming up the stairs. So, is that what you refer to? Yeah. So but I'm not really always naked.
No. I want to have time for people to maybe to ask you questions and also share the things that they loved about your writing. So I want us to close on what I think is just one of the most beautiful essays. It's heart-wrenching. I'm talking about Love Means Nothing in Tennis. This is about your marriage and how you both worked to save it. There's an image at the end that is so wonderful. It was like I was like holding my breath because I didn't want to scare it away, It was so beautiful. And, in that moment, it was like, this is one of your greatest gifts, is how relatable you are.
That's very nice
you
of
have a
you.
lot of gifts as a writer, but being relatable is high up there. And as I was reading this, I thought, God, we're not alone in this. Like, you were
Right.
saying things that I know I related to them, and I know a lot of my friends related to them. And so I found it like strangely instructive. Like, you didn't write this as like how to save
Right.
your marriage,
Right.
but it was instructive
that's
and
nice.
very uplifting. So,
All right.
if you could cue this up
Okay.
for us, let me see. It's
This piece was part of this, actually the part of my series was a Modern Love. Dan Jones, who is the editor of the Modern Love column, the thing he said he liked about it is that people don't usually write about, and it happens to many marriages. You have a time where you think the marriage might not work out, and then when it works out, you don't want to revisit it. And that's what this essay is about.
so
anyway.
just go all the way to the end.
I will. Okay, so basically the setup is, we had been married a long time, and then we also often fought on the tennis court. I'll just say that. And then we went to this we were going to marriage counseling, and one night, I said, I think it's over, and he said, I think it is too. And we left and decided our marriage was over. We went to the restaurant across from our building, a little neighborhood place where the waiters knew our names and the chef knows how we like our burgers. We sat in a booth in the back. Dennis ordered soup. It was all over. There was nothing to lose, so I decided to serve up my final grievances, the things I had felt he needed to know to fully understand that he was the cause of our marriage's untimely end. I reminded him in a resigned tone of the time he did this, the time he did that. These were the wretched rags of resentment, so bitter and old, so petty, that I had been too ashamed even to mention them in therapy. So now I balled them up and tossed them into Dennis's court. Dennis just ate his soup. When he was finished, he wiped his chin with his napkin. We were both so calm. It was as if the island of Manhattan had been gassed with some kind of Valium vapor. I guess there was no emotion left. It was all over, and we both experienced this finality as a surprising relief. We were like the penguin couple in March of the Penguins that accidentally dropped and broke their egg. They looked at the egg for a time, and then they parted ways because penguins don't mate for life. They court each other, commit each other's voice to memory, produce an egg, devote themselves to its care, and when it dies or matures, the parents part company. This is how we had come to view our marriage, as a penguin marriage, a partnership devoted to raising children. We had hoped to stick it out until they left the nest, but now it looked as if that would be impossible, so we were just having a last look. Dennis carefully refolded his napkin and then said, I'm sorry. If I could change those things, I would, but I can't. They're in the past, but I'm sorry. I had expected him to cry foul, to react the way he did when I said a questionable tennis shot of his was out, but he just said he was sorry, and I believed him. He had no reason to make up that kind of thing now. His calm admission inspired me to exhale my own litany of regrets and apologies. In the movies, this would have been the moment we leapt into each other's embrace, but in real life, we just ordered more food.
We called the children in the apartment to see if they wanted to go to a movie. That night, Dennis didn't stay in a hotel. He stayed home. The next day, we all drove to the country. The family, after all that mad jostling, somehow had remained intact. What happened that night? I'm not sure I know, but I forgot to mention that our shrink never believed us when we complained about the hopelessness of our marriage, and he didn't believe us when we said it was over. During the months of sessions, he kept catching us doing this thing in the middle of all the verbal sparring. I would attack Dennis, he would berate me, but whenever the therapist said anything in the least bit negative about either of us, we would jump to the other's defense. The therapist would say something like, Ann, it sounds like your negativity can sometimes create a problem in situations like that. And Dennis would say, Ann's not negative. I don't know anyone who described her that way. Or the shrink would suggest that a joke Dennis had just made at my expense had hurt me deeply because I'd grabbed a tissue and pressed it to my eyes. But then he'd see that the tears were streaming from my eyes because I was laughing so hard at what Dennis had just said, and I'm one of those people who can't really laugh without crying. The shrink kept pointing these things out, and we'd say, but all couples stick up for each other. Our shrink insisted that in his experience, they don't. We thought he was stringing us along for the money. I'll just skip to, so we were on vacation. It was our son was about to go off to college. It was the last time we were gonna play tennis on this summer vacation. Dennis and I had a last tennis match before we packed up our son and drove him to college. We had spent that summer knowing we were at the beginning of the end of something that we didn't want to end. On the court that last morning of our vacation, we had each won a set, and it was 5-5 in the final set. We had reserved the court for only an hour, though, and the hour was almost up. There were other players waiting. This would have to be the final game of the match, but the games had been so hard won that neither of us could bear to lose. Dennis was serving in this deciding game. He served carefully and didn't try to ace it past me as he typically did. It was too risky. I didn't take advantage by slamming my return into his backhand court. What if it went out? The match would be over. I hit the ball into Dennis's court, and he hit it back into mine. I placed the ball in his court carefully, so carefully, and he placed it back in mine. We rallied, not with the adrenaline-pumping determination to win at all costs, but with the patience and control that came with not wanting it to be over. Not the summer, not our son's childhood, not this game ever. Back and forth, we sent the ball. I'm gonna get choked up now. And it occurred to me that there was some sort of grace in my husband's form, and I felt it in mine, too, as we both worked to keep the game alive just a little longer by trying to find each other's sweet spot, by playing for once to the other's advantage.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you.
Oh, that is so beautiful.
Thanks.
That is so beautiful. I was right there with you. Oh my goodness. Okay, let's we have some time before we're going to go to questions, but Eve is over there with Ann's books, and I know Ann will sign and personalize books after, but right now, anybody have some thoughts or some questions for Ann? Because if you don't, I do. This is my shot.
Oh, yes.
Hold on 1 second, I have the mic for you.
Yeah, sure. Okay. And speak into the mic so we can get it on the recording.
Will do.
So you mentioned that you check everything with your parents and your kids when you write about them, but the woman on your doubles tennis team who's kind of a monster, did she get offended? Like, are you concerned ever about blowing up your personal relationships, or do you just say?
Okay, I have really poor hearing, but I understand. So it was about, say, the woman?
The woman you play tennis with who's kind of a monster.
Yes.
Did she read that? And
Well, you know what? Everyone that I play tennis with, because if I play tennis with at this place. It's like a gym with a tennis court, and so many people guessed who it was. She doesn't play even at our place anymore. She would never in a million years, though, recognize herself. That's what I mean about that. But she wouldn't. But everyone else knew who it was. But that's a good question. Yeah, and that was also a thing of. That essay was about how this woman is just a bully on the tennis court, and she's always, she's the other blamer. If she hits the ball out, I had done it somehow. And anyway, after playing with her in doubles, I walked out with a friend who was on the other side of the court, and I was going on. She's such a bitch. Why did she? Did you see what she this and that on and on, and then. Also, she had been bullying me, and I felt like she didn't bully everybody else as much as me. So I turned to my friend Kate, and I said, after pausing for a minute, I said, you know what, Kate? The problem with me is I'm too nice. And my friend Kate We'd been walking, and she stopped, and she was doubled over, laughing, and couldn't even breathe. She was laughing so hard. And I said, "What?" And then she realized that I was serious. She thought I was joking, because apparently she thought the idea that I thought I was too nice was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. So, but thank you for that question.
Thank you.
I was wondering, is there any other books that you would like to see adapted into a movie?
That I have written or other people have written?
Oh, that you have written.
Oh, many. Actually, are often people disappointed with the adaptation? I think often people feel that books that, they like the book better. There are a few exceptions, but I'm trying to think of what hasn't. I actually don't know I'd have to think about that for a while. I don't think I've ever read a book and that wasn't adapted that I thought should be, because usually they are. And I actually, when I'm writing contemporary fiction, I only read books written in like the 19th century. I tend to read, older books. And so all of those have usually been adapted into like Merchant Ivory films.
What about The Foundling? Like
The Foundling has been an option.
Because it really is historical fiction.
Yeah. The Foundling was my last novel, and it was set in the 1920s. It was loosely based on my grandmother, who worked at a eugenics asylum in Pennsylvania, and I found that out. And became obsessed and spent 10 years researching it and writing that. And that has been optioned. So hopefully, it's exciting. I think it'll be a movie at some point.
Yeah.
And
that was true, that women were sort of gotten rid of.
Yeah, it was like in the early 20th century, if you were poor, if you were rich, you could be like Zelda Fitzgerald, get drunk, and you could be gay, you could be everything. You could be eccentric. But if you were poor, you would be put often in a place where my grandmother worked, which was called the Laurelton State Village for Feeble-Minded Women of Childbearing Age, and they were just placed there to keep them from having children. It wasn't just poor, young unwed mothers. It was women whose husbands were tired of being married to them. It was hard to get a divorce in those days. It was, sometimes women with drinking problems, all sorts of things. But mostly it was a holding pen for, bad girls. And it was so sad, and I learned so much about it, and I still am fascinated by it. I probably once a week still research that, and that book came out.
The research is like deep,
Yeah.
it's heavy. Well, you get into it. I mean, you talk in your essays about how you're this like compulsive learner.
Yeah,
You do EMS and house plants and ballroom dancing.
I
And
take up things.
tennis
I
and-
take up things. I'm easily fascinated, and then I become obsessive a little bit. But that helps me as a writer. Right now, I'm working on a new novel that's set like in the early Cold War. I wake up and that's what I think. I go to bed. I know it's a book when that happens, when I'm thinking about it all the time, and I'm starting to become invested in the characters. But I think that I did move a lot growing up as a kid, and I was often alone. And I spent a lot of time in libraries and reading, and also a lot of time making up imaginary friends.
Yeah.
They have the real ones. So I think, is that
Does
anyone
anybody
else?
have a question?
I think-
Another question? I mean, you can certainly talk to Ann at the book table.
Well, I just want to say I really appreciate you all coming out on such a lousy night. It's such an honor, and you don't know how much authors appreciate readers who come to events like this. And some people don't know that, probably know this now, but if you're in a book club and you're reading a book, go to the author's website. Almost every author has a website, and they usually, if the book just came out, they have events coming up, and you can say that they're coming here. You can call the Elm Street Books, find out where and then even if you can't go to the event, they'll sign it and personalize it for you. And that's something Amazon can't do. I don't want to attack Amazon, but I'm just saying that is why we need to keep our bookstores and our libraries. But also, it started in COVID, and some authors are still doing it, and I do it when a book first comes out. Some authors will visit your book group via Zoom. So just, I bet some
great.
people here are in book groups.
That is
so thank
great.
you all.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you so much.